Cool. Happy Friday, everyone. It's good to see you and be here with you again. It's been a heck of a week. We're going to talk about some cool stuff. I want to give a shout out to Mills James, who's here helping us get our message out and make sure that we are doing our part to bring humanity together and make the country a better place for all of us. As always, we just want to
I'm hearing sound on the stream.
All right, cool. Yeah, it's just that chord right there.
Yep.
All right.
I got it. I'm not touching it. I'm sorry.
Oh, that's all good. It's from my kid.
Tell me
Right. We should be going. We should be on. Yeah, we're live. I already hit record. Huh?
You did it on OBS already?
Yeah, we're streaming. Did you hit record on OBS?
It's already recorded.
Yeah, it's recording.
Okay, solid. So, all right, cool. You know, when you start doing new stuff, you got to figure new stuff out. So it's all good. All right. We've breathed. I'm going to play the ancestral drum call. Put your ancestors in the chat, and we'll call them after I'm done playing. Ashe.
Willis D. Sanders Jr.,
Willis D. Sanders Jr. Ashe.
Tommy Jean Hubbard Sr.,
Tommy Jean Hubbard Sr. Ashe.
Frank and Verna Lomax,
Frank and Verna Lomax. Ashe.
Ed Bell,
Ed Bell. Ashe.
Edna Bell,
Edna Bell. Ashe.
Charles Bell,
Charles Bell. Ashe.
William Bell,
William Bell. Ashe.
George Bell,
George Bell. Ashe.
Mike Bell,
Mike Bell. Ashe.
Danielle Bell,
Danielle Bell. Ashe.
Patricia Bell,
Patricia Bell. Ashe.
Larry Baker Jr.,
Larry Baker Jr. Ashe.
Charles Fisher Goins.
Charles Fisher Goins. Ashe. Ashe. Oh, we honor all of the ancestors, those who are called, those who were not called, those who are directly related to us, and those who aren't, those who have made significant impacts on our lives, on the history of the world, and even those who are in the ancestral realm that have yet to make an appearance in this world.
Bertha May Pitts,
Bertha May Pitts. Ashe.
Frank Lomax,
Frank Lomax Sr. Ashe.
Ella Lomax,
And Ella Lomax. Ashe. Ashe. So we remember all of these names, and even those that weren't called, because it helps us remember who we are. And in remembering who we are then able to combat the psychological violence that is perpetuated against all of us in this American construct, so we can remember that we are human and we remember to treat each other humanely. Ashe. So last week, I introduced a concept that I've been working and thinking through for a number of years. And it's in response to questions about how we can really move society forward. How do we heal? How do we repair? How do we come together in a way that creates a just, verdant, equitable, and inclusive society? And I've been very hesitant over the years to give any answers because I still don't feel confident that I know the answer. But I think that, you know, based on the conversations that we've been having since COVID started and, you know, the ideas put forth last week and the response that I got from many of you and others whom I've spoken with about this idea, that this might present a path forward. And that path is really the practice of a politics of humanity. At the point where we're fully engaged in that practice, a politics of humanity, then a lot of the issues and inequities that cause so many of the other issues that we find ourselves combating right now in this very divisive political context in America, they end up going away, because what shifts is the way we engage each other, right? If you'll recall, we had the definition of politics that I found just in a regular dictionary, nothing special. Politics is defined as activities associated with the governance of a country or other area, especially in the debate or conflict among individuals or parties having or hoping to have power, right? So a politics of humanity is really leveraging the power of the people for the people, in the interest of the people, and in a way that allows people to become their optimized human selves, to then add value to the community of people, right? So if we do the right thing for the right reason, because it's the right thing to do, and we treat each other as we literally want to be treated, and not exploit folks as, you know, American capitalism, having come through slavery, has evolved into this form of exploitation that we often don't see, then we begin to see a lot of these problems in society going away, right? If we're truly valuing each other, then that means everyone, regardless of your ethnic background, regardless of your class status, is receiving the highest and best educational value, right? If we're practicing a politics of humanity, that means our resources as a nation, the trillions and trillions of dollars that's part of the gross domestic product, are going to benefit all of us, right? And not inequitably toward one group or to one, you know, branch of government or anything, right? It's equitable. Everything's happening to make sure everybody has what they need so they can do what they need to do so society can be better, right? That's what the crux of a politics of humanity is. And as I said last week, having heard both the Republicans and the Democrats in their conventions, I don't see that vision of unity across all of our differences in a way that makes or leverages our differences as the best thing that we have as a country that's not bound by blood, right? So today I want to push that idea forward and focus on culture shift. Last week we said there were three things primarily, a lot of subsets, but three things at the macro level that we could do as a culture or as a society to begin the work of cultivating a politics of humanity. One, we had to work toward a culture shift. We had to fundamentally change the way we see ourselves and operate as a society. Two, we have to reimagine education, right? Instead of educating young people for that good job or to be a cog in the economic wheel, we should be focused on making sure that we are cultivating healthy, happy, and whole human beings. And then we can figure out how best we add value, right? It's not about a janitor versus the hedge fund manager. It's not about, in my case, I'm a classically trained composer who plays jazz music, which economically are the lowest ends of the economic strata in music. If I was a rapper or a rock musician or whatever, it would be totally different. But right now in COVID, we're all the same, right? None of us are able to play. So that shows you that it doesn't matter what genre, it doesn't matter who you are, where you're from, because we're human, we all have similar experiences, and fundamentally, we have more that binds us than separates us, right? So today I want to focus on that culture shift. In order to really fully realize that future where we're practicing a politics of humanity, we have to be very intentional about how we address our history, right? In releasing the 400 and African Epic project, the 12-album, 8.5-hour cycle, we started in the past to understand where we came from, to give context for the present and allow us kind of this platform to move forward together, right? One of my favorite quotes is from James Baldwin: "Not everything faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it's faced." So if we choose to be very intentional about what America has been, then we can have a collective understanding for what we want to be or what we are now and what we want to be in the future, right? Again, politics is power, that discussion around power. And we, the people, can and do have the power. We can use our power to create the future that we want. Again, in order to really be intentional about that, we have to start with a deep analysis of the current culture, develop new strategies for educational outcomes, focus on the reality of American history, global history, and the cultivation of human beings that are healthy, happy, and whole. That's the educational piece, right? That then leads to that shift in value from I, me, meaning I'm building wealth for my own family and everybody else has to pull themselves up by bootstraps that they might not have, to we, us. That means everything I do adds value to the wider culture and community. And so in terms of analysis of the current culture, I want to use three examples today. One reflects on, the police, what we're told about the police and what the data says about the police, and then by extension, mental health. Because recently, back in March, on March 23rd, a young man or a gentleman and we'll get into all of that, but mental health issues, his brother calls 911 because of the mental health issues, and the gentleman ends up being killed by police. And then the third story is a woman who self-identifies as a Jewish white woman who's from suburban Kansas, but she made her career as a professor, author, and historian at George Washington University, claiming to be African American or African descendant. North African, Boricua, she uses that word, and what does that have to say about, and then she blames all of that on mental health. So what does that have to say about identity, how our psychological health affects how the world sees us, and then the outcomes. In the one case of the African-American man suffering mental health issues, the police kill him. In the case of the white college professor, there is some fallout, but she's going to be cool, ultimately, right? So let's start with the police. There obviously are a lot of issues, right? But my brother, Conway, was a police officer, and my cousin Daniel was a police officer. I know a lot of police officers. I get the stress of the job, right? I understand why they're necessary. What I don't understand and what I don't support is how they're deployed, and fundamentally how their deployment has connected to America's racialized history. So I want to kind of deal with kind of the narrative that we're given, and then show some data that hopefully presents a small case. I'm not making a large case or a large argument today, but a small case that the way we do policing not only is wrong, but can be changed, right? So first, we're told that police have very dangerous jobs. Their job is to protect and serve, period, point blank. And without police, there'd be lawlessness and chaos, right? What we're not told in that same context is that policing may only be dangerous because America has done a great job of building inequity in its infrastructure, right? So I grew up in Linden, which is a neighborhood in Columbus that is not the safest neighborhood, right? Suburb, that's very safe. Policing happens very differently in those communities. And one of the reasons it happens very differently is because, by comparison, Linden has absolutely no resources compared to New Albany. New Albany people, if you can afford to live in New Albany, you're going to great schools. You don't have a problem paying the rent. You don't have a problem, for the most part, driving what you want to drive, which is really nice. And you don't have a problem with where your kids are going to end up, right? You don't worry about your children leaving the house and not coming back because of how they look, just because. Right? Policing happens very differently. That doesn't mean that there aren't racial issues in New Albany. It does mean that the assumption is that if you're in New Albany, the cops treat you differently than if you're in Linden. When I was growing up in Linden, and even now, police, it was like terrorism, right? We were seen as threats and we were treated as such. Now, how does the wider cultural issue come into play there? Because Linden is a ghetto. It's a place where poor people have been put in and left hanging, left dry, right? Very few resources, very few substantive businesses to employ folks, and you know, the Columbus City Schools, you know, while I think there are a lot of people in that organization that are doing the best they can, a lot of the families don't have options for better education for their children, right? So the expectation is lower, and as a result of that low expectation, a lot of that becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, and those kids become the quote-unquote degenerates, or the folks that the mayor talks about when he's referring to gun violence, as opposed to our next leaders, right? And the police respond accordingly. They know that if we're in Linden, this is what I've read and I've heard, we expect certain problems. When we're in New Albany, we don't expect those kinds of problems, right? And that is a social construct because of something called redlining, right? Don't believe me. If you want to do the research, go read The Color of Law by Richard Rothstein, who outlines all of the redlining and other federal regulations, statutes, and laws that have relegated people to certain areas for most reasons having to do with their racial identity. If you don't believe me about the financial thing, go read Marsha Baradaran's The Color of Money. She talks about the work that Africans in America did post-slavery to build wealth in traditional banks and otherwise, but because of federal regulations, they were not successful in the way that others expect they should have been successful, because those federal regulations held them back or barred them from the protections that majority-owned banks got. Again, Slavery by Another Name by Douglas Blackman talks about how the institution of slavery evolved. Michelle Alexander's New Jim Crow talks about the rise of the prison industrial complex, where the school-to-prison pipeline, that kids coming from Linden are now on the path to prison, as opposed to those kids in New Albany or any suburb in any outside of any urban area. And then there's an article, a great article in Forbes from May 3rd, 2017, called The Clear Connection Between Slavery and American Capitalism. I'm not making any of this up. I named those resources so you can have the opportunity to go learn for yourself if you haven't read those texts. But the narrative that we have about police is really predicated on class and racial ideas and ideals, right? So here's something. The police have a dangerous job. Well, in 2019, and I'm not saying it's not, but I'm just going to give you some data. In 2019, nationally, 48 police were killed in what they call felonious, hold on, let me say this the right way. Felonious deaths, right? 48 police officers were killed in a line of duty in 2019. This is according to the FBI, in what they call felonious deaths, where 41 officers were killed in accidental. What is a felonious death? Well, 5 of those 48 were killed in unprovoked attacks. 15 were killed during some kind of investigative or law enforcement activities, like a traffic stop, interacting with wanted persons, or drug-related activities. 9 of those folks were killed in tactical situations, meaning a hostage situation, a search, or serving search and arrest warrants. 4 officers were killed during crimes in progress. 3 were killed during arrest situations. 2 of those 3 were vehicular pursuits, and 1 was a foot pursuit. 3 were killed because of responding to disorder or disturbances, like a domestic violence call or public fights. 3 were vehicle pursuits, and I wonder if that's a redundant number. 2 were ambushed, and 1 serving a court order. 48 officers in the whole year of 2019, according to the FBI, were killed in a line of duty because someone intended to kill them for whatever reason. Conversely, 661 American citizens were killed by police in 2020 as of August 30th, this year, right? We don't have numbers for the police yet via the FBI, but already 661 American citizens have been killed, right? And it's trending up. In 2018, 996 American citizens were killed by police, and in 2019, 1,004 citizens were killed by police. And so far in America, 123 Black Americans have been killed. Now, what makes that interesting? 48 total officers killed in 2019, right? Already, and in 2019, 1,004 American citizens were killed by police. By ethnicity, from 2015 to 2020, that's 32 Black Americans for every 1 million Black Americans, compared to 13 white Americans for every 1 million white Americans. You see the disparity there? And every time we see that on social media, it creates ripples of trauma. Ripples of trauma. I bring that up because I understand that police officers deal with the underbelly in many cases of society. Like, that's what we think their job is, right? And that's what the narrative focuses on, the worst of who we are. But by comparison, any life that is taken senselessly is not a good thing, period. I don't care who you are and what color you wear, right? But when you look at the numbers, 48 in 2019 compared to 1,004, that's another disparity or discrepancy or inequity, or however you want to describe it, that I just find untenuous. I find untenuous. How do we create an environment where everyone has the support and the ability that they need, and the ability to be their best selves? Support when they fall off, and, a high five, congratulations when they're making it happen, right? If we create that through a politics of humanity, then we don't need police the way it currently exists. We would know, I think, if America had not been founded on those 3 original sins, right? Slavery, the genocide of First Nation peoples, and the disenfranchisement of poor white males and white women. The bones of the country have to be thrown away, and we need to rebuild, as one of my favorite slave owners says. When the government doesn't work for you, Thomas Jefferson says, it's up to you to remake the government so it works for all people. We'll deal with the other 2 after I play this. Solid. So, the numbers tell a different story than a narrative, in my opinion, when it comes to policing, which means that there's room for not just reform, but reimagining, rethinking the role of the police. Now, remember, the police originally evolved out of slave patrols, right? Their job was to protect the human chattel, the property, the people property of quote unquote slave owners, right? I say quote unquote because I just don't believe ever that you can own people. But because in America that was legal, they needed a group of folks to make sure that their property didn't run away, as if, you know, you're just supposed to stay there and be enslaved, right? Slave patrols evolved into police, and they continue to evolve into what we understand now as law enforcement. So when we're having those conversations outside of that context, right, I think it's very difficult to really reimagine how a group of people can serve and protect when for the whole history of that sector of our professional community, you know, their job has been to ensure that one group of people are safe at the expense of another group of people, right? And I'm not making a blatant statement that every officer is that and is aligned with that mentality. I'm saying that's what the job has been historically, and fundamentally that's where it comes from. Getting back to the roots, the bones of American culture being something that we have to do away with in order to imagine a country that is best for all of us, right? So, now, mental health. Daniel Prude was an African-American man who lived in Chicago, suffered some mental health issues, severe mental health issues, had to move to Rochester to be with his brother, and was hospitalized. Upon being released from the hospital, he's back home with his brother, and for whatever reason, he bolts out the door, according to the New York Times. He just runs, and his brother doesn't know what to do. His brother calls 911 and says, "I need help for my brother who's having a mental health breakdown." We know this because the brother, Joe Prude, gave a statement when the family released the footage earlier this week. He said, "I called 911 to help my brother, not kill him, not lynch him," is the word he used, lynch, right? Why is that important in this context? We start with the police and the historic relationship and role the police has had to communities that were not, quote unquote, the 1%, right? And then we see a case of an African-American man based on that history who does not get the help he needs, but in turn is killed. They literally put a bag on his head to protect the officers from his spit because, you know, COVID, right? Gotta be safe. But who was there to protect him? When a call is made, an emergency call for a mental health issue, regardless of how you look, why are armed people coming to the scene? Does that suggest that as a culture, we think a certain way about people in general who are suffering from mental health issues, right? Do we see people who are suffering from schizophrenia or what have you? I use that as one of the mental health issues that I think is probably one of the worst to deal with, whatever it is. Do we see them as dangerous just because? Or do we as a society see a criminalized black body, which is what it's been since 1619, compounded with mental health issues, therefore is even more dangerous, right? It's hard to parse through these things because it's so ingrained in our culture. I've often said that racism is insidious. So is classism. Insidious. Why? Because if that family had more resources, they would not have had to call 911. They would have had other resources at their disposal, and their brother, Daniel, might still be alive. We don't know. On the other hand, completely different end of the spectrum, but still attributable to mental health, we have this woman who has come clean. She is a white Jewish lady who grew up in the suburbs of Kansas. Her name is Jessica Krug. She is a teacher, a professor at George Washington University. She admitted through a Medium post to passing as black, Puerto Rican, or black Caribbean, Afro-Caribbean, right? She used the word Boricua. She says she's from El Barrio. I can't say it with a straight face because it's hilarious to me, right? There's this colloquialism that everybody wants to deal with black culture, but nobody actually wants to be black, right? Because in order to be black and live as black, that means you would have to be subjugated to the same racism, to the same inequitable access to resources that many black people still are faced with today, right? Here we have a woman from Kansas, the suburbs, who decided that her career would move forward probably more easily if she was black. She's a celebrated historian, right? She wrote a book that was published last year. It was nominated for 2 very prestigious awards, including the Harriet Tubman Award and one named for Frederick Douglass, right? And she's an activist. She calls herself an activist, right? This is Rachel Dolezal on crack, right? Rachel Dolezal, if you'll recall, white woman with braids. She had an African-American affect, like that look, right? She rose to be a leader in the National National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, NAACP, and yet her parents came out in 2015 and said, I don't care what you think, but we're her parents. She's not black, she's white, and all of a sudden, right, all this stuff goes on. But what did Rachel do? The same thing that Jessica Krug is going to do. She said, she admitted to the folly. She said, I was wrong. She wrote a book about it and went on a tour, right? That's the same thing that this lady is going to do. There has been fallout. Her articles have been pulled down from reputable websites that have published her work. She's lost some significant relationships in her field, right? And she's being investigated by George Washington University. But race and class, you cannot take that out of this context, right? A gentleman, obviously having mental health issues, is met with armed police who kill him. This woman, who says she admitted having mental health issues that drove her to self-identify as black. And not only is that appropriation, but she leveraged that identity to get her position, to get her book published. It's about blackness and issues of African descendant folks. Like, she embodied this identity, and she will live to tell the story. She will literally live to write the book, right? And I get it. Completely different ends of the spectrum, But the reason why they're connected is because of how America views notions of race and class and how that deals with or infuses our sense of identity, right? I guarantee you, as a matter of life and death, there were people like Walter White who passed. African-American man, very fair-skinned. He passed as a white man. He worked for the NAACP. He reported, he was able to go down south and report on lynchings and all kinds of things with a level of anonymity that his complexion afforded him that other African Americans could not. Walter White didn't come out as black until it was absolutely safe for him, and it's different because everybody understood why he would pass as white. Again, our notions of race and class inform identity and inform power dynamics. He had a better life as a white man than he would have had as a black man because of the race and class issues in America, right? On the other hand, Professor Krug, she made a choice and she appropriated an identity for personal gain, period, point blank. That is power, privilege, to assume an identity that is not yours, come out and say, oh, my bad, I made a mistake, it was a mental health issue, right? She might lose her job, but ultimately she's going to be fine because she still has her life. Walter White, had he come out as black during the time that he was active with the NAACP, he would have been killed. We have Daniel Prude, mental health issue, obviously black, killed. These are extreme circumstances. I understand that. But what I'm showing is that at one end of the class strata, at another end of the class strata, it doesn't matter where you are. It doesn't even matter how that identity takes shape. What matters is how society views that person. And that's why we are where we are. We see each other as different, as other, in many cases as dangerous or the enemy, because we live in a society that has not taught us or cultivated a sense of community and humanity across ethnic, class, and even gender differences. A politics of humanity gets rid of all of that. A politics of humanity brings us together because we are human. Right? It's the difference between I think, therefore I am, and Ubuntu, I am because we are. When we are collectively practicing a power that is centered around humanity, then everybody has the capacity and the ability to add value because we see each other as valuable. It's completely different. It's completely different. Imagine a world where we see each other as we see ourselves. We see each other as we want the world to see us, right? What would happen if we began to have that kind of conversation? Yes.
The social contract that race and cultural identity is one-sided and wielded as a device of power and oppression.
The social contract of race and society is what?
Is one-sided and wielded as a device of power and oppression.
Is wielded as, yes, is one-sided and wielded as a divisive, yes. So the comment in the chat is absolutely what I'm getting at, right? These issues, race, class, gender, are used to divide us only as it relates to those on the lower end of that racial strata. Now remember, race is a construct, it's not real, right? There was no such thing as white or black prior to the late 15th century. Everybody identified as some kind of ethnic, descended person, right? I'm not just Germanic, I'm from a particular tribe. I'm not just from Africa, I'm from a particular ethnic group with a clan inside that ethnic group, and then, right? But in Ibram Kendi's Stamp from the Beginning, he traces the use of black as a term to identify a group of people outside of their ethnic identity to Portugal. And I can't remember the prince's name. I think it's maybe Prince Henry, who commissioned an author to write a book about his uncle's, King Alfred's, basically conquering escapades, right, and adventures. And so this guy goes to Africa. He brings back 10 or 12 now enslaved Africans, and they are called black. So it starts to dehumanize them from the beginning because we don't know who they are, their names, where they're from. But he did that to, quote unquote, civilize them and bring them to Christ in the Catholic Church. That's where all that comes from, right? And so that has been used for the last 600 or 700 years to divide us. And we keep getting hit with the rope-a-dope and fall for it. A politics of humanity completely shifts that power dynamic from the prevailing narrative of divisiveness to one of unity and inclusiveness, equity, justice, healing. You cannot have you cannot have healing until there's justice. And you cannot have justice until the culture shifts in a way that allows all of us to understand that we're better together because we're human, not because you're a millionaire and I'm a millionaire and we can't hang out with that thousandaire or hundredaire or zeroaire, right? No, it's I have $1 million. My family is taken care of. How now do I add value to those who don't have what I have? Right? I keep saying this and it's true. It's true. It just is what it is. When we were calling ourselves neighbors in the 30s and 40s, this is, again, one of my favorite Toni Morrison quotes, that dictated how we engaged each other. Race was crazy, but we were still treating each other as neighbors in as much as we could. And now as shareholder, right? It's extracting resources, not adding value. That is a problem, yeah.
As applied to legal punishment for use of crack cocaine versus powder cocaine versus opioids.
Yeah, and so there's a comment in the chat about the discrepancy between powder cocaine and crack cocaine and opiates and everything else. That's the legal infrastructure that reinforces these racialized ideas, right? It reinforces. We know, police know this, that black kids and white kids use marijuana about the same, right? Everybody likes a little reefer every now and then. But when you have policing in the neighborhood like Linden, that is so much more present than it is in a neighborhood like New Albany, who do you think the police are going to find more often with weed? The kids who are being policed more. And so when the data comes out, it shows that black kids are more likely carrying weed or using weed than white kids. And it's only because white kids in New Albany and other areas are policed less than the black kids, right? And you can even extend that beyond race. Poor kids are policed more heavily than affluent kids, right? So when we're saying we want to see the data, we have to question the data. I question this data from the FBI. I think there are some redundant numbers there. But 48 deaths of police in the line of duty compared to 661 this year alone, 1,004 last year. Why are we killing? It sounds crazy, right? Only 32 people are killed by police per million if you're black, and only 13 people are killed per million by police for whites. You know why that's insane to me? Because there are countries where every year that number is zero. It's zero. The United States police kill more citizens than any other country in the world. We also imprison more citizens than any other country in the world. But this is supposed to be the land of the free and the home of the brave. You have to be brave to leave your house in a country that is more likely to kill you than not compared to other countries. You have to be brave to speak your mind in a way that brings people together rather than getting down with this divisive rhetoric that we hear right now. You have to be brave to wear a mask in favor of your neighbor being safe and healthy. These are the things we have to be brave about in the United States. That makes absolutely no sense. The only reason why it is the way it is because our bones are bad. The genetic makeup of the criminogenic nature of this country is bad. A politics of humanity seeks to reinvent, reimagine the culture from a human-centered perspective, right? But we have to collectively agree, one, that is important. Two, that it's important enough for us not to just talk about it, but be about it. By being about it, it means we're calling a new constitutional convention and going through the whole Constitution and say, that's racist, that's sexist, that's classist. Let's get that stuff out of there. Let's rewrite and make sure that our founding documents are just, equitable, and inclusive for everyone that lives here. It means that we also have to reimagine education, because the best way to shift culture is to teach that cultural idea to the next generation, and it becomes germane to them. It becomes natural. And they begin to live it as if it is normal, because for them it is. At the point where we're taking this seriously, and like Dr. Erica Chenoweth said, we only need 3% of the culture. We don't need critical mass. 350 some odd million people. We only need 3% of that to say, you know what, we're going to make this happen. We're going to begin to practice a politics of humanity, and we're going to build the infrastructure needed to treat each other humane. Yes?
These deaths are a false equivalence. Comparing a citizen to law enforcement is inherently problematic. That's like comparing the death rate of boys to Girl Scouts to that of enlisted veterans.
Ha! So, okay.
One group signed up knowing the risk and chose the path anyway. Being born black isn't enlisting.
Absolutely true. Being born black is not enlisting and signing up for something that you know is dangerous, right? I agree with that point. I don't think it's apples and oranges in terms of comparison, though, because the narrative, if you recall, I started with the narrative that we're sold is this. The numbers bear out this, right? If the job of being a police officer was as dangerous in the way that we are told it's dangerous. I'm not saying it's not, it doesn't have its dangers. I'm not saying that. I'm saying the narrative focuses on the negative, the danger, and makes that larger than what it is. Because what this number says from the FBI, and again, we can question the numbers all day, but in terms of people who either just sat out to kill a cop, ambush, that's only 2 police officers in the whole country who were ambushed, meaning that somebody was literally looking for a cop to kill, laid in wait, and killed them. I can understand that in the context of war. That's a whole different context. That, to me, is apples and oranges, right? Both cases, folks were signing up for a dangerous job, but a war zone is one where you expect to be met with an enemy combatant whose sole intention is to destroy you. A police officer is someone who ideally is signing up to protect and serve a community of which they are a part. They are not fighting enemy combatants. They are not going out against enemies in a warlike context, right? Serving the community is different than protecting the community in a war context. Yes?
In agreement with you. I'm saying the narrative that we should respond or defend our lives against that of blue lives is a systemic problem we have to, I don't know what that last word is. They haven't.
Oh, yeah. So the argument for a politics of humanity gets to the point. Yeah, we have to deconstruct. Absolutely. I agree with that. What I'm clarifying, though, is that a politics of humanity is one that ensures that all lives matter. Period, point blank. I'm not making the argument that police aren't important. And people get sensitive about these things. And so I appreciate whoever brought that up because I hear you and I agree. And it's not even splitting hairs. Huh?
But us, this is from Dante. But us not looking at this as war is one of our problems.
Us not looking at this as war is a different subject than what I'm talking about today. I hear what you're saying because the war, the culture war, and the war for Black lives is a different thing than what I'm really pointing to today. I'm pointing to really, here's the thing, and I know we're starting to run out of time, but let me put it like this. Tulsa, Oklahoma, Greenwood, it was a black community that was well-to-do. They had a thriving economy. They had wealth, and they had a means of protecting themselves, right? The citizens were armed, and they took care of themselves. There was a massacre, the Tulsa Massacre. And even though they fought at that time, the enemy, the United States Army came in and dropped napalm. There aren't enough guns to wage a war in that way. And I'm not saying you suggested that, but that's what war kind of brings to mind to me is violence, right? The other way to approach war when you cannot win militarily, right, is ideas, ideals that shape culture, right? And it's a deeper spiritual thing that we're getting at. Because my argument for a politics of humanity is in response to the trauma that everyone who has been born or lived for any length of time in America has been infected with. And it's what I call the American pathology. And it's this thing that says, well, you know, if they're poor, oftentimes people are like, well, they just need to get a job. And if they just got a job, they wouldn't be poor anymore. Well, that's not always true. If they got killed by police, well, what did they do? Well, it's not often their fault. Sometimes it is, sometimes it's not. But we don't have that level of grace for those kinds of folks, right? And so it really is getting at this larger macro issue of why the culture is the way it is and how we can push the culture away from those bones that are just ragged and inhumane and start to build infrastructure that brings us together, right? I get it, and you're not wrong, but that's a different conversation than the one I'm trying to have, you know? So we'll continue next week with talking about education, how we can reimagine education in a way that brings us together and creates a different culture and society. Thank you for the comments. Please keep pushing and keep engaging. And, you know, if you want to send an email shout out, just go to marklomaxii.com and send your comments, and I'll respond, and we can continue the conversation. So have a great long weekend. Don't forget, we got a new record that just came out last week. It's The Last Concert. It's a live recording of our last performance before COVID stopped. And we have the 400 curriculum, the 400-year suite. And thank you for watching. I'm going to play us out. Huh? Oh, and we're behind on the podcast, but we're doing a new one this weekend, so it'll be up next week. Peace.